So just for the states around the room, how are you guys looking at when you're applying for grants? And I meant to ask this earlier in the freight discussion as well, to take into that consideration that cost, if what we have is one state told us that they, applied for a grant in 2019. By the time the grant is approved, it's 2020. By the time that you get it to the process, now it's 21, 22, and the time that you applied for the grant, and I mean, it was a world of difference, right? And so how do you look at when you're looking to apply for these discretionary grants? Are you taking into consideration that costs could be, in some cases, I think Cheryl mentioned earlier, like 600% higher for certain types of aggregates or other things like that? Or can you offer some advice from some of your colleagues?
This is Caroline from TxDOT. Generally, when in the past, when we've done our cost estimates, we don't necessarily put like, a 50% increase in supplies and costs. But there's some factors where we would put in where we're looking at some type of maybe cost going up. And we'll run into that. And Jerry is here from our government affairs office. But what we're running into now, of course, with the supply costs and everything else, projects that we had costed 3 years ago, let's say at $50 or $80 million. And now it's like, okay, now it's going to cost another $3 or $5 million more because of cost of asphalt, cost of everything else has gone up. So yeah, that's going to pose a challenge for any grant funding we go into, because we're not going to know what it's going to happen 3 years from now when we get the grant. So what is happening in some of our cases, what we've done, we have one on I-10. We just had to be creative because with the grant is static. So one, we either put more state funds to the project, or two, we cut some components of the project or look for cheaper options, like let's say truck parking availability system. Do we do in-ground or do we do cameras? So we're like, okay, let's do cameras instead, where we can do entrance and exits into the safety rest areas instead of putting in-ground detectors, because that costs a lot more money. So we're having to kind of be flexible on that, but you can't really do that on some of the highway designs and projects, because if we plan for it's a freight corridor, heavy freight corridor, and we're going to go use concrete, and we have to do that because we can't really cut corners there. So you're seeing that, yes, we're going to have to go back. In our case, we go to our commission and leadership and say, look, yeah, the cost is fairly high, so we need to add more money. Or the contractors come with the bid and the bid is way higher than what we had estimated. So do we put in more money there, or we go on with bid again with additional costs? So that you're going to see that all state DOTs, everybody's in a pinch right now for cost overruns on project, not because we underestimated, but because of just the supply chain issues, the inflation issues that's just, kind of blown some of our budgets out, Sean.
I want to echo some of what Caroline said. I mean, we're hitting some of those challenges. I think what I'm hearing from some of our locals as well, and we have not yet, but will be experiencing this, some of the steel issues. It's not necessarily even the price of it, which is kicking it higher, but some of the rail projects that we are working on, whether they're at ports or other issues, the time delay in getting that in place. So by the time you apply, and then you get notified of the grant and you get all of the paperwork done, sometimes our folks are being told the supply of rail or frogs apparently is a huge issue, is what I keep hearing for the Made in America, Buy America world, is you're still talking another 2 or 3 years out, and you start bumping up against the end of the grant, the thou shalt be done by piece of the puzzle. And so we're seeing some of that come into play. The cost, although we didn't factor in enough because nobody would have anticipated this level of inflation and supply chain demands when we applied for some of our current grants, we're definitely seeing that, and steel seems to be the the one common component, whether it's from a bridge project or from a rail project.
Yeah, I echo some of what's been said. This is Von Dakota, Ports of Indiana. We're in the midst of $58 million worth of these types of grants, from the original Tiger all the way through PDAP. I think the knowledge now is anybody applying for a grant, your costs are already inflated because they've captured that. No guarantee that that's not a future problem. Everybody applying for a grant should recognize that if they're awarded, any overages are on the awarded. So that's something you have to consider as you go into the process. Typically, organizations are hesitant to put soft dollars in unless they know they have the grant. So very few of these projects are quote unquote shovel ready. So the time delay has to be considered. I think we take the position that we do estimates based on a forward time frame to kind of soften our liability there. But that's just how we approach it.
Any more responses? Caroline, are you seeing anybody raising their hand online?
I have another question for Susan, if there aren't any more responses on that topic. And this information may be a little outdated, but I know Chairman DeFazio was really focused on spending down the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. Is that still an issue, or has that been resolved?
Yeah, that's a great question that popped in my head when Max was giving his remarks, and for sure Chairman DeFazio has been a huge proponent of that. I haven't heard much about it lately, and I'm not sure why. If it could just be a situation where it's sort of like he's beginning to wind down a little bit. He's retiring, and this is it will be the end of his chairmanship. But yeah, and it was really bubbling up there quite a bit for a few years, and then it kind of just sort of seemed to either get sidelined or other things took precedent with the IJA and other things. So I'll see what I can find out and see if there's any life left in that. If it's one last thing he wants to try to push across the finish line as a legacy type endeavor.
Okay, thanks, Susan. I think then we'll move on to our federal partners update. We have Wesley Coleman with the U.S. Army Corps and Wade Moorfield with the Maritime Administration. I don't know who plans on going first, but Wesley's going to go.
Caroline, we'll have Wesley go first, and I'll bring up your presentation.
Here we go.
Just a sound check. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep.
Great, thank you. And good afternoon. As it says there, my name is Wes Coleman. I'm the acting chief of the Programs Integration Division at Army Corps of Engineers headquarters. Thanks for inviting me to speak today. I apologize that I can't be there with you. This is actually the second trip to New Orleans in the last month or so that I haven't been able to take for a variety of other reasons. So it's not that I am avoiding New Orleans by any means. I spent a good part of the early part of my federal career there, so place near and dear to my heart. Basically, my responsibilities here at the Corps of Engineers include oversight of the development and defense of the Corps' Civil Works program budget, as well as the execution of the various appropriations that are provided to us by the Congress. I'm going to speak today to some of those appropriations. Truth in lending, though, I started this job a few weeks ago, March 17th, actually. It was 2 days after our fiscal year 2022 appropriations bill was signed, and a full 6 working days prior to the fiscal year 2023 budget coming out on March 28th. So it's been a really busy 2 months for me. And I guess the longer I'm in this position, the more I find out that this is sort of the normal pace that that we work by. So there may be some questions you have along the way here. I may have to jot them down and get back to you with answers. The ones that I can answer, I'll certainly try to do that. But next slide, please. This is sort of an eye chart type of a slide. You know, I'm not looking to break down all the numbers in it, but it basically shows the trend in our budgets and our appropriations from fiscal year 2001 up through the budget that was released this year in fiscal year 2023. The blue line that you see there is the actual historic total appropriations that we've gotten. The bars represent the annual request in the president's budget. Each of those bars, as you can see, is divided into 9 different funding accounts. They include an investigations account with funds for our studies and our pre-construction engineering and design, operation and maintenance or O&M funding for the projects that have continued federal core oversight following construction, funds for our regulatory program, the flood control and coastal emergencies or FC&CE program, and that's for preparedness and training of our core staff to enable them to assist communities during flood, hurricane, and other natural disasters. There's some funding there for the staff of the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. Obviously, our construction account is in there. Funding for our Mississippi River and Tributaries program. General expense funds for our headquarters office here in DC, as well as our division offices. And then funds there for formerly utilized sites remedial action program or FUSRAP. And a few things I wanted to point out on this slide. The fiscal year 2022 appropriations is another historic appropriation for us. It's 7% above the fiscal year 2021 appropriation, which was historic at that time. It's about $8.3 billion compared with what was a historic budget in fiscal year 2022 of almost 6.8 billion. But I also want to point out that the fiscal year 2023 president's budget at 6.6 billion is a small decrease from the fiscal year 2022 budget, somewhere in the range, I think, of about 3%. However, that small decrease could easily be because of the supplemental appropriations that we received in fiscal year 2022, which I'll talk about in a little bit here. But we'll keep our eye on the budgets over the next few years and see how that trend line adjusts. This may just be, you know, a little tick, like I said, because of all the other appropriations that are coming in. Next slide, please. This year, we received 2 very large supplemental appropriations, at least large for the Corps of Engineers. The first was the Disaster Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, or what we call DRSA. This was a response to the administration and the Congress to the effects of Hurricane Ida. And as you see by this chart, it shows that we got about $5.7 billion. And that funding was provided about $2 billion for short-term repairs and about $3.6 billion for long-term construction. Of that, about half of it went to Louisiana, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and the other half of it went nationwide. And we have a byproduct work plan for this. It's actually out on our public budget website, so I'm not going to drill down in that level of detail right now, but I do encourage you to reach out to our public website and check out those projects if you would like. Next slide, please. And this slide depicts the other supplemental that we got. These were the funding authorities provided by the recent Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, or IJA, depending on how you like to use your acronyms. For the Corps, this is a generational investment into the nation's infrastructure. The $17.1 billion from IIJA added to the $5.7 billion that I just mentioned from DRSA, and our traditional fiscal year 2022 appropriation of $8.3 billion. That gives us over $31 billion in appropriations, most of it in fiscal year 2022. That's about 4 times our normal yearly appropriation. So when I say words like historic and generational, you know, it's really appropriate. For the IIJA, 90% of the investment goes towards construction and operation and maintenance. And the remaining 10% goes to things like our regulatory program, short-term storm damages, and our expense account. We're often asked how projects are selected for these types of supplementals. So basically, when prioritizing these types of projects, we consider things like life safety, legal mandates that we might have, national security, environmental and economic returns, and of course, finishing what we've started. We had a problem for several years there where based on incremental funding, we found ourselves not being able to finish a bunch of our projects. So that's become a main prioritization factor for us. As you see, the IIJA funds were provided for 7 of those 9 funding accounts that I originally mentioned. 90% of the money has no geographic limitations, which really helps us get the funding out to the highest priority projects. The $4 billion that you see there for operation and maintenance is huge for us. It's going to come out incrementally with about $2 billion in fiscal year 2022, another $1 billion in fiscal year 2023, and $1 billion in fiscal year 2024. The $11.6 billion for construction, rehab, and restoration, that has about $1.5 billion going for rivers and harbors, about $2.5 billion for inland waterways, about $2 billion for aquatic ecosystem restoration, another $2.5 billion for coastal storm risk management, and about $2.5 billion for inland flood risk management. I also want to mention a new program that was funded in IIJA, and it was included, I believe, for the first time in the fiscal year 23 President's budget. We call it WIFIA, the Water Infrastructure and Finance Innovation Act. And in IIJA, we got $75 million for WIFIA. And with these funds, the administration is focused on non-federal dam safety projects, but we're looking for that $75 million to leverage long-term low interest loans that hopefully will total about $7 billion. So hopefully a little bit of investment up front will leverage a lot of investment at the end. Just like with the DERSA, the project breakdowns for the fiscal year 2022 and fiscal year 2023 IIJA funding are available on our public webpage. That's just a really quick laydown of our appropriations for this year. And I don't know if we want to entertain questions now or if we want to wait until after Mr. Moorfield gives his presentation, but I'm available for any questions folks might have.
Okay, thank you, Wes. Do we want to, does anybody have any questions for Wes right now?
No questions from online.
Okay, well, thank you again, Wes.
Thank you.
And then we will move on to Wade.
Thank you. Carolyn, you want to put up the slides?
Yep, we'll do. One sec.
I will note that I think, what did Max talk about? Historic levels of funding, and then Wesley's talking about generational investments. It's there's a lot of money, and then I take that in context with what I think Shane said about, you know, the timeline for grants and inflation, and I will say that we have heard from some of our stakeholder organizations about the timeline that we have of the 2 years more or less between the announcement of an award and the actual signing of the grant agreement. So that takes on a little bit more urgency. And I just want to say that, you know, that we note that. There you go. All right. So good afternoon. I'm Wade Moorfield. I'm a transportation analyst with the Office of Ports and Waterways Planning at MARAD. I see a lot of familiar faces in the room. I gave this presentation this morning to the Freight Committee, so I apologize, but I'll try to be take a little slower tack this time and maybe go into a little more detail. I'm still not a freight person per se, but our office does touch on a lot of freight type activities. So next slide. So as far as our federal update, I'll give you a quick introduction about my office in MARAD, talk about some discretionary grants and updates. I think we know where that's headed. And I'll talk about some updated guidance that's come out recently on some funding criteria for grants, and try to add a little insight to that, and give you an update on what we're doing with regard to state freight plans. We talked about that this morning, and an update on some of MARAD's research activities, and then the end of the presentation, which I'm happy to make available, or I think it will be made available, has a bunch of useful resources, you know, just hyperlinks, things like that, to program resources, various types. So next slide. Oops, other way. So MARAD Office of Ports and Waterways, our mission. These are the topics that are, you know, should resonate. What you think they're across government right now, but generally we're focusing on, you know, reducing congestion and emissions near ports. That's been kind of, you know, one of our charges for a long time. But now we're looking at, you know, environmental justice, reducing the environmental impact on neighboring communities. We're seeing a little bit more of a high profile with that type of activity. Electrification, we'll talk about that in a minute when we talk about grants, but we're seeing some eligibility for grants now that specifically address electrification at ports and other low carbon technologies. And we're talking about resiliency and we've always talked about we've always talked about modernizing ports, and then we talked about sustainable ports, and now we're talking about resilient ports. So that's, you know, resiliency is factoring in heavily. And then, and always, like with our marine highway program, promoting waterways as an efficient, effective, and sustainable surface transportation option. We still, you know, we still carry that bucket. And then finally, support U.S. competitiveness and expediting flow of commerce across supply chains. I think we have a presenter today to talk about some of the outputs from that activity, but that is of growing importance, and we hope we can make things better. Next slide. There we go. So Port Infrastructure Development Program, this is where we talk about historic levels of funding and generational funding. So $450 million for the Port Infrastructure Development Program under the bipartisan infrastructure legislation. And then another $234 million was appropriated in fiscal year 22 appropriation. So that is a big bump. The Port Infrastructure Development Program, as I'm sure everybody in here knows, has not been around all that long. We're very happy. I think we're in the third year of it now. It's about $230 million a year has been about what we've been putting out. So we're looking at about almost 3 times that this year. We're doing that all in one tranche, if you will. Those applications are due May 16th. I will be doing reviews of those grant applications, so don't talk to me too much about what you're planning, but I'll get into some of the criteria in just a minute, just a few of the kind of the newer updated criteria. But basically, IIJA created a lot of environmental and emissions mitigations eligibilities, and also new resiliency kind of topics that are eligible activities. So hopefully we'll see more applications come in with those activities in mind. And I'll remind everyone that state governments are eligible applicants. We typically don't see a lot of applications come in on state letterhead, so to speak, with partners, but we do see a few. But I would encourage everybody to at least consider that as we talk about aligning grant applications with, you know, state adopted typical things like equity action plans and things like that. The other grant program specific to MARAD is the America's Marine Highway Program. We have a NOFO out right now that closes on June 17th, 2022. We have $25 million available through the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, and another almost $15 million through FY22 appropriations. That's a large bump. Typically, America's Marine Highway will see $4 million a year. So that's a big bump. And those are grants, as probably most of you are aware, but I'd be happy to talk about it in more detail. Those are for financial awards grants for designated projects on designated routes. So, you know, there's a process. I didn't want to do our marine highway presentation, but, you know, designated routes and then projects on those routes, and then you can apply for the grant funds. So it's a bit of a process. And I know some of you in here are familiar with that. Other US DOT infrastructure grant programs. I won't talk too much about rebuilding American infrastructure with sustainability and equity, the RAISE grants, AKA Tiger, Build, whatever. Those national infrastructure investments, I think, is the statutory language for that. But they did get $1.5 billion for fiscal year 22, and that application has closed. And I think I heard somebody say this morning there's like 1,000 applications that came in. So yeah. And then the other 3, infra, mega, and rural, those are not all new. Mega and rural are new. Infra is returning. Those were put out under one consolidated notice of funding opportunity. Those applications are due May 23rd. And I just would highlight, I guess, 8 billion for infra through 2026, 5 billion for mega through 2026, and 2 billion for the new rural grant program through 2026, I think that says. So that's a lot of money, and hopefully we don't add to inflationary pressures too much with that. But anyway, so we're excited about some of these new programs. Particularly, I'm particularly excited about the rural grant program. So we'll see what comes in as far as ports and maritime on that from perhaps some of our inland waterways, that sort of thing. Let's see if I have anything else on that. I got a few notes here. Oh, I guess I should mention there's a new program. It doesn't really fit specifically in ports and waterways. It's called Protect. It's a resiliency program. It came out of the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, and that's an interesting program. We're working with FHWA right now. It's their kind of their ball game, but the Protect Fund is a resiliency program. It's projects to improve resiliency, and it has two components. The Protect program will have two components. I heard resiliency mentioned earlier. That's why I mentioned it now. Is that it has a grant? There's a grant component for the Protect program. And there's also formula funding. So your state highway formula funding can be applied to for the Protect program as well. So that's a little bit new. And I'm not sure, but I think the formula funding can be used as the match for the grant funding. I'm not certain. So I think that's it. And I mentioned, that we are aware of the issue for our grant programs about the timeline between the notification of award and the actual signing of the grant agreement. And we are looking for ways to shave time off of that. As I said, it's between 18 months and 2 years right now, which is a long time, especially when you're looking at inflation. And also, I mentioned this this morning, but I'll mention it again for those who weren't here, is that I know it's the rural, and I think it's the infra grant program where there's a new provision in those where you can actually, the non-federal funding for the grant can actually be paid with other federal funds. Typically, that has not been an element of our grant programs. It's always non-federal match, but there are some new provisions that do allow for other federal funds to be used for that match. And I'm not specific on exactly what those federal funds are, but I know that's a new wrinkle that has been added. And I know it's in rural because we're aware of some of the funding issues that rural, less than 200,000 population areas face when it comes to coming up with the grant match. I think that's it for that slide. Next one. Marine highway, there's the marine highway map. You all probably seen this before in its other iterations, but basically we have 29 marine highway routes in 41 states and 54 designated projects. Caitlin Hughes was on this morning talking about some new provisions and kind of activities, and she mentioned about the bipartisan infrastructure legislation with regarding National Highway Freight Program and encouraging multi-state compacts and also multi-state freight corridor planning. We think the Marine Highway Program is a good mechanism for demonstrating that, if you will. So we'll see where that leads. But in any event, the America's Marine Highway Program hits on a lot of kind of current issues. We talk about, safety, efficiency, and capacity goals for our nation's freight transportation system. So I'll just leave that there. Next slide. So recent updated guidance or criteria for discretionary grants. So here are just a bunch of hyperlinks, really, but we start with executive orders relating from the new administration relating to equity, climate change, and Build America, Buy America, Made in America, Work in America, I think, something like that. But anyway, so the executive orders came out and I will mention that, of course, safety remains the #1 DOT priority. I neglected to mention that earlier. So I just want to say, when we talk about, US DOT priorities, safety is always paramount. But these are the kind of evolving guidance that we see gaining a little bit of prominence in some of our discretionary grant programs. They were basically new, I think, last year I think we kind of caught a lot of people flat-footed with their grant applications at the last minute with some of the guidance that came out with regarding, equity action plans and climate action plans and integrating those into your grant applications in alignment with those plans. So hopefully, basically a year later, we're hoping that when we see the grant applications come in, that there'll be some alignment or some progress with regard to these criteria, and they continue to evolve. So equity, we're talking about barriers to opportunity, underserved populations, environmental justice. One in particular, Justice 40 initiative, where I think the administration has cited a goal where 40% of discretionary grant benefits go to underserved communities. So that's a laudable goal. USDOT has just released an equity action plan that's available on the website. And there will be a virtual info session on May 25th on transportation equity. So we'll encourage you to attend that. Climate change, of course, growing in importance. We're talking about resiliency, emissions, electrification. Center for Climate Change at DOT is now the Transportation and Climate Change Clearinghouse. And as it implied by the name Clearinghouse, there's a lot of good information on that website. And all of these guidance items here, they do relate back to what how the review criteria kind of roll out in our discretionary grant programs. And then Build America, Buy America, we've always had kind of the domestic preference. We've had, I won't say all kinds of issues, but we've had some particularly complex issues when it comes to ports and some of the equipment that ports buy or need for their projects and getting domestic sourcing of those. And then there was we used to do waivers, and then there was like, well, we're not doing waivers anymore. So then we struggled to find ways around it. So now, for better or for worse, OMB has stepped into a leadership role in this with their Made in America office. And they put out some relatively straightforward guidance and the waiver process. So it appears that once again, we have a kind of a waiver process in action, but I don't believe, I guess USDOT would make recommendations on those waivers, or our office would make recommendations to USDOT, and then that would go over to OMB to make the final call. And all of the usual provisions apply about, domestic availability and, how hard is it to get and how critical is it and that sort of thing. So optimistic that that's going to, there were a litany, I don't know if anybody knows, if you're all familiar, maybe some of you are, about, how Buy America, Build America, domestic preference requirements, those were just spelled out in so many different executive orders over the course of, decades. And then there was some federal acquisition regulations kick in, and then you have some agencies like Federal Highway, they have their own Buy and Made in America provisions in law, and other agencies do too. MARAD does not have the benefit of that. So we just were forced to kind of muddle through with all of these different executive orders. And so the new guidance in Executive Order 14005 basically repeals all of that guidance that was done through executive order before. I know the Trump administration put out a flurry of executive orders on Buy America. So that has all been kind of repealed. I won't say repealed. It has been repealed, but they've basically been rolled up into the new guidance. So that's a particularly important executive order to review, and the OMB memo that goes with it describing about the OMB Made in America office and their activities. So hopefully that's progress. We'll find out. See if I have anything else on that one. I don't think I do. I have a note here about state freight plan relationships, and I'm not sure why I made that note, but maybe it'll come to me in just a minute. Next slide. Speaking of state freight plans, so MARAD, we do review state freight plans in collaboration with our FHWA partners. The bipartisan infrastructure legislation revised the requirements, as many of you know, for state freight plans. There are the new guidance on that statute is pending. I think we heard this morning, June or July, the new guidance will be out. But in the meantime, I think you've all been empowered to move ahead with your state freight plan updates. Don't want them to expire in order to use National Highway Freight Program funds. But there are some new provisions specific to ports, the inventory of ports, and then some activities regarding your state freight plan advisory committees and representation from ports and maritime communities. So we're looking forward to having an improved presence. And I will say, I don't think it's actually in this presentation, but we worked with and I don't want to get ahead of Andrew's presentation, but we did work with the special envoy on the supply chain task force, and the importance of having appropriate state freight plan advisory committees and representation from across the supply chain was reflected in the kind of the outputs from that. So we're looking forward to seeing the updated state freight plan advisory committee makeup, if you will. The other one of the big changes, National Highway Freight Program apportionment used to be 10% for freight intermodal and freight rail projects under the I call it bipartisan infrastructure legislation. And the IIJ is a bit of a mouthful, so I'll call it the IJA, as I think the previous speaker mentioned. But freight intermodal or freight rail projects. So now, and that includes ports. So up to 30% of your state's National Highway Freight Program apportionment can be used for those types of projects. That's up to 30% now, so up from 10%. So that's a big bump. And then MARAD, from our review of all of the prior rounds of initial state freight plan submittals, we have developed a presentation of best practices for the maritime related components of those state freight plans. And we are happy to share that with the state DOTs and, or their freight offices or whatever, just to inform, your development of your update. If you've already moved forward with your update, we're happy to, provide input on that. We understand it's a little late in the game now and people kind of move ahead, but we do have a good inventory of best practices from across the country, and we will happily offer that up to anybody who requests it. Just reach out to me. And then, National Highway Freight Program eligibility also now extends to locks and dams. So that's a big change. I think Federal Highway Administration is working on guidance about how that's going to be implied. It says locks and dams. We think the intent was for navigational locks and related dams, but we're waiting to see how that plays out. So that's a big change, especially when we talk about all the money that the Corps has now to be doing projects. So yeah, big change. Next slide. There we go. So speaking of so this kind of ties into our best practices presentation that we offer states. So this is kind of a peek at what we do actually internally at MARAD. These are not necessarily outlined in state freight plan guidance, but this is what MARAD looks for when we review a state freight plan, because we use state freight plans frequently in our activities as we deal with not just stakeholders, but requests that come in from external, from Capitol Hill or upstairs or whatever, when there's questions about a state and what they're up to with regard to maritime activities. So we look at multimodal connections, intermodal, domestic maritime shipping, marine highways, are they referenced in the state freight plan, maritime markets and commodities, that sort of thing, ports and port infrastructure, maritime infrastructure, you get the idea here. And out of that, we track, we kind of do a spreadsheet comment log, we do review summaries of each one, and then we provide that feedback to the state DOTs when we review their state freight plan. So, we don't, it's not all internal, we share our experiences, we share our impressions, we share our suggestions. There's nothing in the law to require a state to follow up on that. It's just in the spirit of, just helpful guidance. Next slide. One of the things that comes out also, we track national states that use National Highway Freight Program funds for port and or maritime projects. So those are the states that you'll see in purple. There's quite a few. And then the other states, we also ask states to identify if they have specific state funding sources that they use for ports and maritime. We heard Wisconsin, they have the Harbor Assistance Program. I think I heard, I met somebody at lunch, I don't see them in here now, from Illinois. I think they just put forward a lot of money for their ports out of their state transportation budget. And a lot of other states are doing that as well. So we try to capture those here. This is a little bit of an old slide, so it's probably outdated. So we will update that as we get new state freight plans in. Next slide. And then here, this is my pitch for assistance for in your state freight plans and for us to do whatever we can to help raise the awareness for or the profile, if you will, for domestic maritime shipping and the America's Marine Highway Program. You'll see those kind of metrics down on the trailing end of this chart. But the good news is, and probably one of the most important things is actually the first item that has the greatest representation, which is general stakeholder outreach. That's what, we encourage that, we support that, and we generally find that states do a very good job of that in conjunction with the creation of their state freight plans. So not a lot of criticism there. If anything, it kind of reflects on MARAD that perhaps we should be doing a better job of, exploiting, if you will, the resource of our inland waterways and coastwise transportation with domestic shipping and the Marine Highway Program. So we have a little work to do. Next slide. So now I'll shift a little bit into some of our research activities that we have ongoing at MARAD. First one is Waterfront Asset Management Tool. So I think it was 2019 round of build grants where we required, if you got a build grant, that you had to have an asset management system in place to track kind of the progress of that construction project and kind of the maintenance of it and come up with a plan, that sort of thing. A lot of applicants, well, I won't say a lot, some applicants didn't have a formal asset management program in place. So MARAD has developed one. Phase one of that project is complete. It's basically a spreadsheet-based tool right now, but it is all set up with the wireframes or whatever else you call it to turn it into a web-based tool. And we have a phase two project to actually do that, to make it a web-based tool available for everyone. It's for in-water structures. It's designed for in-water structures, and there's a whole lot of criteria about risk and all that sort of thing. But I think it could probably be applied to other infrastructure as well. So we'll be announcing that tool in the near future, and we hope that people will take advantage of it. And we're not sure if the web-based tool will happen. We still haven't gotten sign off from our chief information officer, but we're optimistic. And then we have a Transmat Data Hub. We talked about that this morning, and I think you've all heard, kind of the themes, and big data, I guess, is the word that used to be used, especially with the supply chain. So you've got, all of these different data points, and, how can we best use this data to identify, weaknesses or opportunities in our supply chain to maximize the freight throughput. So this Transmat Data Hub actually started before the supply chain crisis, started before COVID. So we worked on it, and now, it's kind of, everything's kind of, blown up. Not in a bad way, but it's just reached a much higher profile. But basically it's some sort of a web-based visualization tool to be able to incorporate a lot of, at this point, I think it's publicly available data, and there's a mechanism there perhaps to capture other data in the future. And we'll just kind of see where that goes. We have a visualization, and internally, we have a demonstration of that visualization tool next month. So we're looking forward to that. It's been a long time coming. Our other activities with the Intelligent Transportation Systems Joint Program Office, that's a FHWA and OST kind of a consortium, if you will, but MARAD does participate in that. Port community systems, that's kind of been a hot topic lately. With regard to supply chain efficiency and getting cargo into ports and out of ports. So we've identified perhaps some opportunities to improve the standardization of data for the operation of those systems. And we're moving forward with that. And that also has some roots, if you will, in the supply chain task force that I think one of our speakers is going to talk about in just a few minutes. And then port automation technology research. We've done some demonstration projects for port automation, automated drayage. I think was the one we did most recently down in Florida at the SunTrax facility. Again, I just make the kind of the disclaimer, if you will, that when MARAD looks at port automation, it's not about replacing people, replacing jobs. It's about making jobs better and improving efficiency and making workers' lives better. And then domestic preference support, we have a continuing cooperative agreement with the American Association of Port Authorities. They have been, I won't say very vocal, but they have been very clear lately. That's one of the reasons that we've come up with this whole, kind of initiative, if you will, to try to reduce the timeline between the notice of grant award and the signing of the grant. AAPA has reflected from their stakeholders that is a priority item. And then the other is domestic preference. So we're hoping perhaps the new Made in America legislation and the Made in America office may help with that. But we're also looking at other ways to domestically identify the quantity I guess we're looking to quantify the demand for domestically or for foreign sourced items and investigate domestically producing those. So that's exciting. Next slide. So now we get into the useful resources. Bruce, you're on this slide. We've got, these are our Maritime Administration Gateway offices. We have a brand new gateway officer up in the Pacific Northwest who's just started yesterday. And then we'll have a new one starting in the Inland Waterways St. Louis office in a couple of months. It's very exciting, but the gateway offices are your, I'm sure many of you are familiar with your gateway officers, but they are the kind of the point of entry into MARAD and the federal system for regarding your ports and waterways. Next slide. Port Planning and Investment Toolkit. It's a great resource that we really haven't been able to exploit or share as much as we would like. We encourage you to download it, but it includes, so the Port Planning Investment Toolkit has several modules. The first main book includes a planning, a feasibility, and financing modules. Very good information in there for really for if you're starting a new port, about how to identify your markets and, you know, quantify demand, and then put together, you know, do your feasibility analysis and even put together your financing plan. There's a lot of advanced information in there about financing large port infrastructure projects. Overall, but the toolkit is really just to help ports obtain funding, be that federal funding or be that private sector funding or bonds or whatever. So we encourage you to check out our Port Planning Investment Toolkit, and we continually update that. And we're working on some sort of Buy America revisions to it in the near future. Next slide. Committee on Marine Transportation System has an excellent resource. It's the Federal Funding Handbook. As you can see on the slide, it's really a value-added tool, helps local and non-federal level practitioners as well as federal stakeholders identify federal resources for the marine transportation system. So it's really a great tool. So I encourage you to check that out. Next. And then the routes program. This is upstairs, Office of Secretary of Transportation, rural opportunities to use transportation for economic success. This started a couple of years ago, and I think they're making some progress. They have a great toolkit. They have an excellent matrix, a funding matrix that identifies US DOT grants, and it also kind of, you know, what those grants can be used towards. And I'm sure they're busy right now updating that toolkit. Next slide. Yeah, that's just a link to the toolkit. Next slide. And then here, this is just some of our websites. So we have a Build America Bureau. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's for a loan, US DOT loan office, if you will, for large scale infrastructure projects. There's a link to our Port Planning Investment Toolkit. Again, some port infrastructure development grant overview and our latest information there. And then the next slide. And then the next slide is just more stuff. I think we talk about the Transportation Infrastructure Finance TIFIA loans and RIF loans, private activity bonds, all that sort of thing, and so a few other programs that are MARAD adjacent. And that's all I have. So thank you. I'd be happy to take any questions if anybody has them. Thanks.
Thank you, Wade. I see we have one, and then if that's okay after that one question, I think our next speaker has some time constraints. So Wade, if you're going to be in the room, if people could follow up with the ones after that. Let's go to the first one.
We can wait.
No, we've got, it's not 2:15 now. Let's go.
Chris Collins, Louisiana DOT. Two questions real quick. Lawsuit by the, the Endangered Species Group. What's the name of that group? Against MARAD, the lawsuit, any update on that?
I don't know about the lawsuit.
You don't know about the lawsuit it's on the MARAD program. Bruce, you know something about that?
I'm going to answer it by not answering it.
Okay.
You know, the lawsuit was specifically for America's Marine Highway about NEPA process.
Programmatic review.
Right. And nothing has been resolved. So other than commenting on, we're aware of it. That's all I can say.
So it's going to court then.
That's all I can say is that it's still an unresolved issue.
Okay. And second change, wasn't there a change to the Marine Highways program where you don't actually have to be a designated route on a designated highway? Well, on the designated highway, but you don't have to be a named entity in the route to participate. Isn't that something coming up next year where they're dropping those requirements?
I don't think we're dropping those requirements. I'm not a marine highway program person. That's not my office, but I believe yes, I think that there's partnership opportunities now. I think you still have to be sponsored by somebody that's in there, but the person who's actually doing the grant does not have to be named in the original project designation. I think that's how I understand it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks again, Wade. And again, when we get past if people have further questions. But I think, Caroline, we have our next speaker under our guest presentation is Carl Bensel, who's a commissioner with the Federal Maritime Commission, to give us an assessment of China's control of container and intermodal chassis manufacturing. So with that, I would turn it over to Mr. Bensel.
All right, Commissioner, your presentation is up, and we should be able, you should be able to unmute your line and speak with the group. He just popped off, so he might have, oh no, he's here.
Okay. Hang on, let me turn my light down. I'll be right back.
All right.
Apologies about that. Carolyn, so what do you want me to proceed directly into the PowerPoint?
Yep, I have it up on the screen, and just let me know when the slide needs to be changed.
Okay, you can start with the first slide other than the cover. I think I want to start off before I get into the report itself on what required my assessment and in consideration of these issues. And it emerged through concerns at the FMC generally on the status of movement of cargo through our port system in the early days of the pandemic, when we saw substantial reductions in the amount of cargo being transported through US ports. And this is, of course, containerized cargoes. And we saw reductions in February, March, April, in the early days of the pandemic of about 20%. And I remember writing a letter to the President of the United States that we would potentially need support for intermodal facilities, port facilities, because marine terminal operations pay their leases based on volumes of cargo going in. And so the early thought was we would need to be bailed out, similar to the federal government bailout of the aviation industry and transit industry. And but we really saw a swing of cargo that went from 20% down by the early part of the summer to being 20 or 25 or even 30% up, depending on which port you looked at. And that swing of cargo created major issues with handling. And frankly, it's not surprising given the fact that you might have a 50% swing in the movement of cargo to have problems. And we did. We had major problems, primarily in the early days at the ports of LA, Long Beach. And we had issues related to not having enough equipment, intermodal equipment, to carry cargo. And that was the beginning of what has become a projected over 2-year period of sustained enhanced cargo delivery requirements for the United States. FMC estimates that last year that we've had increases of over 21% in our containerized movement system. So we've seen volumes that set records on a monthly basis. In evaluating this, I think the next issue that we were concerned about, and while Commissioner Dye was working on fact finding 29. I think all of the commissioners were looking at different elements of transportation and talking to port directors and shipping lines and container leasing companies and shippers to get regular updates. It became apparent to me that one of the issues, in addition to the intermodal chassis situation in LA Long Beach, that was impeding our ability to provide freight was the fact that containers were very slow in being provided for service. And those two factors probably drove that, and the fact that we were seeing these massive increases created the congestion that we've had since that time. And so it has been sustained. It's impacting inflation. It's, in my view, the predominant cause of a lot of the inflation. It's not. It's been attributable, in my view, again, to increases of 3 to 5 times the freight rate and 2 to 3 times the length of movement that's necessary to move cargo containers through the system. And I'll give you an example of what that means. I was talking to an ocean carrier who indicated that it took 32 days to do a trip from Shanghai into the port of Chicago, and delivery at the rail through the rail system in Chicago. But when we spoke, I think probably halfway through the pandemic, it was taking well in excess of over 75 days. So you were seeing 2 to 3 times the duration of movement for the same piece of cargo. And what that means is that that you need more equipment, and that means that you have to have it placed in the right position. That is, we have an import market on the West Coast, and so we have to have a balance of containers that can be sufficient to supply containers for import, and not having as many available for, or need to have as many available for export. So those were the situations that we saw early on, and so I started to do a independent review, consultation with my fellow commissioners on the container manufacturing and intermodal chassis manufacturing marketplace. And what I found was a stunning level of control and domination by the Chinese manufacturers. They control 86% of the world supply of intermodal containers. That includes the domestic 53-foot containers that we use in domestic transportation, and 86% of all containers used in trade in the world. And the Chinese manufacturers controlled 96% of the total market of containers. The balance of containers that are used in the world are sort of regional, odd-shaped containers, or something that were specifically manufactured for regional markets. In addition, these 3 largest Chinese manufacturers control 86% of the global supply of intermodal chassis. The U.S. government, through the Department of Commerce and the Department of the International Trade Commission, has reviewed trade allegations of subsidization twice, both with respect to 53-foot intermodal containers in 2015, and more recently on intermodal chassis. And in the first case, containers, they came to the conclusion that the Chinese manufacturers were state-owned and controlled, that they were subsidized well over 250% of the price of manufacture. But in the case of containers, they said we had no market of domestic production of containers left to support, so they couldn't impose sanctions. In assessing the situation with intermodal chassis, they said we do actually have a market here, and we will impose sanctions on the purchase of Chinese manufactured intermodal chassis. So you can go to the next slide. As I said, the trade actions initiated by the Department of Commerce, while being painful because we were in a situation where we really needed enhanced intermodal chassis, and it has created, admittedly, some problems. It has stimulated domestic manufacturing of intermodal chassis, and there's quite a lot of effort being undertaken now, investment in the manufacture of U.S. produced intermodal chassis. So, you know, there's some real positive impacts that we're seeing, and it may be a while before we really see the full impact of production in the United States. But it's clear that now you have multiple vendors that are starting to compete for this market, as opposed to a situation where you have three dominant producers. I think really importantly, it was evidence that we were able to trace back to the container manufacturing industry that there's five major container manufacturers. They are associated through the Chinese Intermodal Container Association. And they prior to the pandemic were at a meeting and agreed to what was called a cost recovery program, which was the deliberate suppression of manufacturing of containers. This was done just prior to the pandemic and the lead up to the pandemic. It was an effort to get better prices. It was an agreement by the three major and the members of that association to establish it. Was reported in the press at the time, remarkably. And in the lead up to the pandemic, it contributed to reductions in the volumes of containers that were available. And this was aggravated because in the early part of the pandemic, as you will recall, the manufacturing was closed in China. So you had another 2 or 3 months where we did not have container productions. And in the opening part of the pandemic, the Chinese manufacturers of containers were not particularly aggressive in reinstituting full-scale, full throttle production. And in fact, they had very limited production in comparison to other Chinese manufacturers who were really trying to make up for lost volumes of sale. And the information, public information, is that the price of containers went up by over 300% during this time frame. But even more importantly, in talking to multiple carriers, that it was very difficult to be able to get equipment, to get containers. And I think, I really believe that actually, although we've suffered with increased transportation prices, what has been more troublesome is the fact that certain cargo that is necessary for just-in-time production and manufacturing simply is not getting there. And so talking to home builders in Utah, they told me that they had planned to do 205 residential units to build them in the Salt Lake City region, but that in fact they were only able to build 140,000 units because they weren't getting a lot of the supplies they needed. So it gives you an idea of the magnitude of potential business opportunity lost. And then in 2021, the tail end of 2021, the Chinese government stepped up again, and a government ministry official announced that they were working with the industry to reinstitute more aggressive production and to help alleviate trade issues. And again, there was a government official who was making this announcement. And shortly thereafter, the production of containers increased, and actually was quite sufficient at the tail end of 2021 to achieve necessary utilization. And I believe, frankly, that is directly attributable to the need of Chinese manufacturers to get this surplus of Chinese product into the United States. And so while that was a relief in the market for retailers in the United States and manufacturers who rely on just-in-time delivery, the damage had been done, and in fact is part of the reason we're suffering with these inflationary costs. So I think the lesson learned there was there's some mitigating interests that help with continued trade in the export of Chinese products, but that does not necessarily extend itself to other markets. So for instance, we've seen issues related to inadequate supplies of containers in other areas, South Korea, India, Vietnam, and other places where we've had supply problems. So there is questions whether or not that manufacturing dominance is being utilized to manipulate trade, frankly. And so you can go to the next slide. This market's an interesting market, and looking back, the majority of containers that were built in the early part of intermodalism were built in the United States. Movement migrated after a period of time to China and then to Korea, and as part of control that the Chinese government envisions for strategic industries, now it's completely dominated by the Chinese manufacturers who have an interlocking, connected ownership with controlled companies. And it's also connected to interests with the steel manufacturing industries in China that are closely aligned with production technology and quotas. So essentially, the PRC holds a near absolute control over a critical part of the global economy, and that's the movement of containerized cargo. It is apparent to me that the port system in the United States is an essential economic engine, probably undervalued, probably misunderstood in importance. During the CARES Act, for instance, we gave the aviation and transit industries $123 billion, and at a point where those industries were down about 90%, and we gave the maritime and the affiliated freight industries $4 million. At a time when that economy was largely sustaining our economic abilities as a nation. So we haven't spent as much time considering the implications of this trade, the monopoly on the service that's essential to moving cargo, and that is the container itself. And I am less concerned about semiconductors than I am about marine containers. You can go to the next slide. As I said, the industry is completely dependent on the Chinese manufacturer of containers. So I met with many ocean carriers, and they explained a deep frustration with that dependence. They acknowledged that they were not getting equipment that they needed to provide the service that they wanted to. It impacted our trade fortunes, our economy. There had been efforts in the past, for instance, to break this monopoly. A company in the United States that uses 53-foot domestic intermodal equipment, containerized equipment for trucking, had built a factory and had started to produce in the United States, but essentially they were undercut and forced out of business and forced back into reliance on Chinese containerized manufacturing. Whether or not, I think there's a question now whether or not this monopoly on the manufacture of containers is being utilized, whether it's being used for leverage on other countries. And I can't tell you it has or not, because we can't identify that. But I will tell you that there are numerous programs in impact for the production and the manufacture of containers outside of China now, and that has occurred since the pandemic. So there are efforts in Vietnam, Turkey, India is evaluating it, and their concerns are our supply chain is not the same as those coming from China. And so if I can't get sufficient sufficient containers to be used in our trade, are we going to lose market share? Are we going to lose our ability to continue to provide services and retail goods to the United States? So it's something that we need to look at closely. I have been in discussion with a number of foreign nations about what they're doing, and they are in the beginning steps of assessing and supporting, in the case of Korea, the manufacturer of containers and other than China. Next slide. The big challenge that we face as a nation is this is an essential industry, and it's connected so closely with so many different partners. So if there's a breakdown in any particular area, let's say it's intermodal chassis are not available, or truck drivers are not available because they're frustrated with providing service to ports, or if the railroad fluidity slows down, it impedes everyone else. Cargo tends to back up in ports. Instead of being 4 or 5 high, they're up to 6. It's very difficult for them to handle cargo when there's so much cargo in a terminal. And so that backup caused by any particular aspect of the supply chain it impacts everyone. It's all connected, and it's sort of like an accordion. And once you push down on the accordion, it starts to create the inability to get air through the system. And so it's even more challenging than other industries that are not as connected. And we've had a shift on the ocean side as well. When I started working in ocean shipping, I think there were 27 major ocean carriers, and now there's 9. And we are having ships that when in 1990 were 6,000 TEUs, now they're 24,000 TEUs. So it puts pressure on for performance to be as fluid and as flexible as possible. So when you run into this congestion, and it's happened before, it's happened in engine bankruptcy and other times when we've had labor issues on the West Coast, and it becomes, it runs through the entire system. So it makes the challenge of operations in this environment even more difficult. I think you can go to the next slide. That's the one. Again, not to stress. I mean, there are some good things in being dependent on Chinese trade for a lot of our maritime commerce, and that they will want to protect that. So we will see enough containers to carry at least Chinese cargo. And then the question is, should we be reliant on this manufacturer? Geopolitical issues is Taiwan gives me a lot of pause if there's an effort to annex Taiwan, or if we wanted to impose trade sanctions on China like we've done in Russia, could we do it? and other issues that we need to be concerned about with our trade in other nations. So it is something that as a nation we need to think about, and we need to think about geopolitical. We need to. It might be more. It might be larger than what the Federal Maritime Commission should be concerning themselves with. It is something that definitely impacted our economic fortunes at this point, but it is a larger issue that deserves deeper consideration. And next slide. The container industry, as I mentioned, is so critical. I hear on a weekly basis so many reports from different aspects of our manufacturing, our service industries, our retail industries, about the failure to get product, and really. It's stunning to me how much is outsourced to various elements. So you have to have a ballet, and if the ballet starts to disintegrate, the whole system is jeopardizing so much of our economy. And I remember talking to someone who was importing figs from Turkey, Greece, and Italy, the only places that you could get mass quantity of figs. So I said, well, other than fig Newtons, what is at risk if we don't get these shipments through? And they listed 10 or 12 different elements of the fig that were used in various food products and all sorts of elements that I was not aware of. And I hear this every day from someone: I am not getting this because of this. Or the other night, infant food products. And I knew instantly that there had to be something that is delayed and in short, and that it was impacting the production of infant products and nursing products. So it's going to be critical to maintain the fluidity of the market. It's even going to be further in the future. I anticipate that we're going to grow in this market even more over time. There's a lot of bulk shipments that are being turned into containerized shipments as developing markets develop their intermodal systems better. There's more volumes that are necessary because of the changes that our economy has made as we've turned more inwards and less towards service oriented economies, restaurants and entertainment, to more stay at home. There may be some changes to that back in the other direction, but clearly it's a market that will expand and expand aggressively. And you can go to the next one, Carolyn. So, what can be done? It's a macro issue. The Federal Maritime Commission does have authorities to engage in assessing trade for unfair conditions to shipping in the foreign commerce as it pertains to the impacts of U.S. flag vessels under the Foreign Shipping Practices Act. And so the remedies for trade violations are pretty substantial. The Department of Commerce has taken action in reviewing both containers and intermodal chassis. The results of the intermodal chassis trade investigations are ongoing. And while they have been troubling in the timing of them, I think there's some evidence that we are seeing production and maybe a more dynamic market here. And they work together with the International Trade Commission. And then finally, the Department of Justice has authority over monopolies. And so we're discussing these issues with these agencies. And I worked on this report. It's available online on my webpage at the FMC. So it's www.fmc.gov. And there's each commissioner has their webpage, and you can go to my site and get a link to the report. It's a 37-page report that sort of outlines what I've talked to you about today. Its aim is to make us think about what our reliance on the container is, and the container industry and the intermodal industry and shipping, and to think about our reliance on the Chinese government for the production of containers, and suggest some potential responses. It also advocates taking steps to provide research and development in the next generation of marine containers. We can do so much more with a marine container than just hold cargo efficiently. We need to look at it in the aspect of the container itself, whether or not we can produce it better, whether it can be longer lasting, whether it can be more environmentally friendly. We can look at it in the context of equipment to monitor where it is. But right now, the lowest common denominator is what it governs how we use marine containers. And so there's a lot of issues on how to try to get some sort of competitors in this market to combat what is a 100% monopoly in a essential product. And so hopefully this will generate some thought and some discussion and some ideas. And I don't think if I was on national TV and wrote the executive summary and told people about that anyone would feel really comfortable with it. But it's a fact, and so we're trying to deal with it as we move forward. And so, Carolyn, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and you can get questions or do whatever you need, and I'm happy to respond.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your presentation, and I will kick it to those in the room to see if there's any questions there.
Hey, this is Garrick Elligan with the TxDOT Maritime Division. So you mentioned that you felt that there was a 250% approximate subsidy being given to the manufacturers. And then later on, you made a comment about the rate increase and a potential manipulation, but about 300%. So does that mean right now that they're at fair market value? Or
no, yeah. So that figure was based on the Department of Commerce's assessments of both containers and intermodal. And so what that did is at that time, it assessed the market in 2019 and 2015 when the prices were not 300% higher. So that the subsidy levels are probably even higher given the value of what's coming back because of the increases in price. But that was related to market conditions that existed when the container was selling at $2,000 for an FEU versus $6,000. And so the subsidies that were identified were that there was land given away for free, that there was substantial subsidies in undervalued steel that contributed to the price, that there were some favorable financing, and it's pretty much broken out through the Department of Commerce and ITC rulings in those two cases. But it did not include the rate increases in containers. So it's probably even higher now because of the value of the commodity, which has mitigated a little bit from that early time frame in the market.
Any other questions for the commissioner?
Yeah, this is BJ Murray with the Illinois Department of Transportation. In Illinois, particularly in Chicago, we've seen a huge influx of empty containers. I guess as a result of them coming in on a commodity and no commodity going out, and they're just looking for places to store those. Do you see any solution to that, or do you see any change to that in the near future?
You know, I think we need to work closely with the railroads on getting those empties out or getting them used. You're in Illinois, you've got a lot of agricultural commodities that could use shipment. You know, so they're trying to get them back there. I really think we need a consolidated push. More is coming into Chicago. Chicago is, and I recently toured the rail yards there a month ago, and it's stunning how much comes into Chicago from the West Coast. It's like an adjunct to LA, Long Beach, and the East Coast ports. So they get so much cargo, most of it's retail cargo. And so it comes in more than is going out. And so balancing where to store them, where to get them, so that you don't want too much back in the railroad terminals so that they can handle what's coming in. So it's a challenge, but I think that the answer would be to work closer with a retailer or exporters of agricultural products. I really am concerned that we are not doing enough to protect agricultural exports. We've seen a 21% increase in containerized cargo. Almost all of it is import, and exports are down a little bit, despite the fact that we have a trade agreement with China for increased utilization of U.S. agricultural products. But I think that the volumes of cargo coming in are so high that it's increasing the pressure on finding storage facilities and sites throughout the city. And you know, Chicago was pretty stunning when you get there and see the volumes of containerized cargo. Although I did, when I was going through the city, I asked every cab driver that I took a cab, 3 or 4 or 5 cab drivers, if they knew one transportation company. And right around us was, you know, Maersk's shipping line going right by. And not one of them could name one company that was engaged in transportation. That was pretty stunning. And I do that at every place I go. And I'm still amazed that the public doesn't get what's going on all around them. But it's a problem because of the volumes coming in and the lesser volumes going out. And the railroads, frankly, have to do a little bit better on trying to get those back to ports. And the carriers have to get them, you know, they're looking at solutions off site, off terminal to keep the terminals fluid.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for the commissioner? If not,
your group is much nicer than like the Soybean Association when I meet with them. I get yelled at. But so, well, if that's okay, Carolyn, I'll answer anything else you've got on the record. If you've got questions or someone wants to follow up, they can always contact us at the Federal Maritime Commission. So it's just cbensel@fmc.gov, and my counsel is John Young. So happy to take any questions to come up after, and good luck on the rest of your meeting.
Fascinating presentation. Thank you.
Sure.
I did offer a question in the chat. I don't know if you saw it or not.
Oh, no. I don't really. So let's look. I do have a question in the chat.
It kind of echoes exactly what Chicago was talking about. We've got stockpiles of TEUs all over the place, and looking at, is there an opportunity here? Is the price point of these containers at a point where shipping empties is viable?
Not only do we ship empties and they're viable, they're probably more viable as an empty than as a full containerized shipment of product from the United States. So we've seen an incredible volume of empties being shipped. Even with the volumes that are being shipped, the import levels are so high that it doesn't matter. So we're seeing record shipments of empties. And in fact, I think there's some evidence that people don't particularly like to put U.S. product in it because it's a lower value commodity. And so and it's a commodity that if you ship it as an empty, you can put it right back into service. So you can get your rate, which is 300 to 500% higher than it was. If it's an export load, the rates are higher, but nothing close to that. And traditionally export rates were a lot lower than import rates. So putting it in as an export, although you get some revenues for it, you also have additional handling. So you need to ship it to an inland point, and then you have to empty it, and then you have to fumigate it and get it back in service. So there's an incentive for the movement of empties. And so we've seen record volumes of empties. And on the West Coast, the steamship lines are engaging big sweeper ships that they come in and take out 24,000 TEUs of empties, and that's it. So there is a market for it. It's growing. Unfortunately, there's some evidence that it may be at the expense of some of our U.S. exports. But even so, we're seeing such a high volume of import cargoes that there's a buildup of empty containers throughout most ports. Oh, we got another one. So, intermodal chassis, the production of intermodal chassis and terminal operations is a big issue. I'm really concerned about the trucking aspect of intermodal shipping. Compensation methodology for intermodal shipping is very it can't compensate truckers as much as the time that they lose to congestion. So at a certain point, we drive the industry, the market for drivers from the market because congestion is creating issues. And in dealing with all of these unbalances, the industry will put in restrictions. For instance, everyone says we need dual transactions at ports. That means if you come in, we're only going to let you come in if you're going to pick up and drop off cargo. And that makes sense because it's one truck coming in and you get two moves going out. Well, it works unless you're an exporter who's not in the business of transportation, and then you're stuck. And so we have situations where the drivers and the wheels on they're going to carry the container are dislocated. They're different. The policies are different in almost every port and inland terminal in the United States. Some of them are chassis pools. Some of them are 2 or 3 large companies that are engaged in chassis management. And they're also impacted by if you have more cargo going out of the port and whether or not shippers are sitting on those wheels. I was at a port in Seattle, Tacoma. I saw 2,000 or 3,000 containers sitting on wheels on a ad hoc containerized field. And I thought, my gosh, that means that they're storing their containers on the intermodal chassis. And so if we don't do a better job of managing the utilization and the efficiency of intermodal containers and set up a better system for the delivery of cargo through ports, we will lose the intermodal trucker, and then we won't be able to move cargo. And so it's something that I think is a major issue, and we need to coordinate that in a way that can work to increase or stabilize, at the very least, the pool of available personnel that are willing to work at the ports. So there's markets right now, frankly, that are local delivery markets, Amazon drivers, drivers that are on long haul trucking that are more favorable than the market conditions that exist in intermodal trucking. I think that's it. Everyone good?
I believe so.
Okay. Well, good luck with the rest of your meeting, and we'll anyone feel free to give me an email if they have further questions.
All right, thank you so much, Commissioner, for joining us today.
Sure, no problem.
All right, so our next presenter will actually not be joining us today. Murad was not able to attend this afternoon, something came up. So I do, before maybe we'll take a break, I guess, for those in the room, there was a question, is Wade still in the room? There was a question that popped up for you earlier that I'll ask.
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, great. So there was a question that popped up for you. Are there updates on the electrification of ferry boats?
Is this for me, Commissioner Bensall, or is that?
Nope, this was for Wade from Murad.
Okay,
yep.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, all good.
I don't have an update. Perhaps the commissioner may know something. I don't have an update on the electrification of ferry boats, and I apologize. I was not tracking. I think I heard earlier that there was a bump in the ferry program funding, and I'm not sure if that's on the FHWA side or the FTA side. So no, I'm not aware of anything on electrification. I do know that one of our marine highway projects is a contribution kind of in cooperation with EPA on the repowering. I don't think it's electrification, but repowering up in Washington State with the Washington State ferries. But I'm not sure how that would align with our MARAD programs specifically. And I know if you look at the Port Infrastructure Development Program, I think we still have the prohibition generally on use of the money for vessels, but there is a new allowable use for electrified vessels, I think like in a port environment that may extend to ferries. I'm not sure. I apologize. I'm probably confusing the matter from my ignorance, but no, my answer is I'm not aware of it.
Okay, great. And then that question came from Trey. Trey, I'll reach out to a few others to see if we can answer your question there.
Yeah, I can certainly work on that and reach back out to you, Carolyn, if you like, but okay. I don't have the answer in front of me.
Great, that's fantastic. We just got another note in the chat box here that IIJ ferry funding would be welcome here as well. All right, so we'll follow up with those with you on that matter.
Great.
All right, and seeing that our next presenter is not able to come, I'm not in the room with you guys, but maybe this might be a good point for a break.
I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads to that. So.
Okay. Well, I'll stay here on the line, and then just let me know when we want to begin again.
Sounds good. Thanks, Caroline.
Yeah, and there's like really good cookies and snacks out there. So
again, stop. Well, at this point, I expect a box at my apartment door.
Exactly, you know, so it's all about priorities. Gia, did you get in today? Did you get in today? No, last night. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm drinking hot water. Yeah, because I can't drink coffee or tea this late. Otherwise, I'll be like awake all night. Yeah. Yeah. The two of them can talk out there.
So the next part on the agenda is the hot topics and go around for the different states. I know there was there's a number of us that were in this morning for the freight conference or freight committee rather that did that. So thought maybe if we would start by if people that were not at that want to share what their states are doing. Mr. Collins, I'm looking over at you. If we want to start that way, and then if there's others that already went and have other topics they want to bring up, that'd be great. But I thought if we maybe start with the states that didn't go yet.
Chris Collins, Louisiana Department of Transportation. You mean to tell me my commissioner didn't give an update? I heard she was at the freight. Oh, yeah. Okay. Thanks, Ron. Yeah, I see you spent a lot of time with all right. Okay. So, yeah, I guess I can start off. So Of course, I'm with Department of Transportation, Louisiana. We are the host for this great conference. Let's start in the office. So in the office, since we had the myriad guys here talking about the state transportation plan, we are in the last stages of updating our waterway transportation plan, which will dovetail into the state freight plan and also the state transportation plan, with an eye on those grading, critiquing requirements that they have. We have a consultant that's been working on that. We hope to have some good results as far as identifying projects that will address choke points and help throughput. Projects can be landside or water-based. Of course, being a waterways guy, I would like to see it water-based, but there are some things that can be done landslide to help with throughput. Also, the plan will have a GIS incorporated map that will be available to external users as well as internal. Internal, we'll use it to answer some questions about certain projects. External, it can be used to see river miles, locations, information about waterways, stuff like that. So I'm really excited about that. Outside of the office, of course, you know, we have the one of the busiest marine highways right outside Mississippi River, which we are currently in the process of deepening to 50 feet. Most of you know that the Corps does most of this work, but in our case, we're also responsible for pipeline removal up to mile 232, actually 233 of the Mississippi River. So right here, we're around, I guess, what is it, mile 105 or somewhere in there. And it's actually fairly deep in this area, but the Corps has deepened all the way up to mile marker 150. We're at a depth of 48 feet up to that mile marker and up to a depth of 49 feet into the Port of New Orleans. So we're slowly but surely gradually getting north of the Port of New Orleans. There are some pipeline issues in the way. Of course, there were a few of us, some of us that are not here, Andrew Sinclair being one who was present at our meeting in NWC in Washington, where topic of pipeline identification and I guess some sort of database that the Corps should actually have in the Corps headquarters. Tom Smith, who's the operations and maintenance chief, actually admitted that the Corps has an issue with identification and mapping and recording of these pipelines, location and depth, and also identifying as built after they have approved the permit and have not gone back to make sure that it's properly built as the drawings indicated. So finally, we have an admission that there is some sort of not knowing in each district. It's not just unique to New Orleans district. Found out it's deep. It happens in all districts where no one knows what's out there and knows if it's actually being built as is. So that has actually kind of gone to my front burner as far as trying to get the Corps to do something about this, because they're the ones who do the permitting and they should be the ones responsible for making sure that all of this is accurate, this information, location, and everything. So I would encourage you, if you are looking for a deepening project, that you have a deepening project on the map, on the books coming up, that you explore the pipeline relocation, because it is costing us, probably it'll end up costing us double of what the Corps estimated, even with the 30% contingency into it. And we're looking at a $237 million project. And our side of it was about 45% of that. So you can add probably another couple of 40 to 50 million on top. So we were looking at coming up with 80 to 85 million. Now we're talking about 120. And that's a huge budget killer. But you know, in the back of our mind, we're trying to see where we can save money and not have to go as far because of some new development. So there's maybe hope around the corner. The Red River we have in our state is also part of the Vicksburg district of the Corps. We're exploring the deepening of that corridor from 9 feet to 12 feet. We have an approved deepening feasibility study. Now we just, of course, need to find the funding. If the Corps has the will to do that, and I know we do, our state does, and the local delegation. The Washita River, which is another non-federal sponsored thing that we handle, is very disappointing because it doesn't get funded. I'm sure all of you have waterways that are woefully underfunded. I won't say mismanaged, but have a lock or something on that waterway where it needs repair. You constantly, oh yes, we're gonna, and it never gets done. And then you have an emergency, and then there has to be emergency funding, and then they put a finger in the dike and they wait for some real funding to come along. So Calcasieu waterway, Calcasieu River, which is in the western part of our state, very important corridor for us. Lots of natural gas. Now we're going with liquid natural gas in that area. Thousands of pipelines come into play in that area. We've had storms, 2 hurricanes hit that area. So housing is a very complicated situation. Employees, workers in that area. We've had port commissioners leave because of the situation. We've had a tough time in that area. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, I believe, for Calcasieu waterway. GIWW, of course, a lot of you states involved around that. We, of course, have our issues with fluff, which we're trying to address. There's issues with cave-ins on the side of the banks, where, of course, we need rock, but rock is more expensive. Maybe we can put some of that rock in some of those empty containers from up in Illinois and send it on down to us. And I think that's probably about it. I might just keep on going. I can't keep going. So we said 2 to 3 minutes. So I'll turn that over back to you guys.
Thank you for that update. And I know I look forward to the port tour tomorrow. So
I am too.
All right. Any other state there we go.
All right, Beaufort, Texas. We're with you up there in the Red River Valley, man. So we're working on that. GIWW, we've been working with the Corps, getting a lot closer with them and developing a GIS-based program to sort of give us a complete holistic view of the challenges that we're currently suffering. We're also working with the private sector. There is technology both out of Finland and out of Israel right now that's really deep into the digital twins. And so we're working closely with GEICA as well to see if we can't develop digital twins for the waterways. Obviously, this is going to be private sector really, stepping up to the plate to help us with this information. But what we understand is that it can be utilized to actually predict shoaling and degradation of the depth of the waterway. So be able to use a little bit more precise approach to dredging, as opposed to, every 2 years we dredge this section, every 5 years we dredge this section, where now we're going to try to pinpoint that. Obviously, one of the biggest things is the waterway deepenings that we have. And, unlike you guys, we don't have any pipelines in Houston, so we should be fine. But so that's definitely on our radar as well. And then as well, the Ike Dike, which is starting to get a little bit more traction, and some of the concerns from industry is what is that actually going to do to the flows and hydrodynamics. So these are things we're working on, and the Sabine Neches waterway for deepening as well. And fortunately, this year we've got an LAR in for $400 million for a revolving fund to help sort of be the interim funding for some of those deepening projects. So that's a taste of what we got going on.
Thank you for that. Can I just ask quick for my own edification, what is a digital twin?
Okay, so digital twin, basically what in the past, the Corps would send out a survey boat and run a survey. Well, now every tug, every commercial vessel out there has equipment on it that is giving depth soundings, temperature, current, all of that. And it's updated in real time. So what you actually build is a replica of the actual asset in real time that's being constantly updated. And that allows you to be, to predict where the shoaling is going to happen.
Got
it only works if you update it in real time consistently. But if you do that, then it becomes digital twin kind of simulation theory for.
Is that part of the ports NOAA ports program, or a byproduct of that?
Well, I think it's a recognition of opportunities to do things better and sort of incorporate the private sector into a lot of the decision-making processes, because sometimes we can get up in front of our skis pretty easily, and we start developing things that maybe people look at us and shake their head and go, why did you do that? So in a concerted effort to engage the users, the stakeholders, those were the kind of the feedback that we were getting back. And when we realized all we needed to do was connect the dots, not necessarily fund it or recreate the wheel, then we sort of took that opportunity to take the credit for it.
Okay, so who's the connector? Who's the connector of the dots? So when you get everybody involved, the information is sent where? Where's that?
So the information is usually sent to third parties, and it can be utilized. So they'll go and they'll negotiate with the port, and what they do is they'll like I said. So if in traditionally you were going, okay, we're gonna dredge this, and we put aside $10 million for this or $5 million for this, they come back and the cost savings of the predictive analysis outweighs what has been the traditional expenditures for the dredging, right? So yes, it costs money, but it costs less money than you would have spent without it.
Yeah.
So that's
interesting.
Okay, thank you. California, did you have an update?
Yeah, thank you. I didn't have a chance to give an update this morning. So I'm Avital Barnea with the California State Transportation Agency, joining you all from, here in New Orleans, but I live in Sacramento, California. My main update I want to share is about our state budget. So during COVID, we thought we were going to have a huge budget deficit. And so we really, tightened all of our belts, and we took pay cuts and all of that. And in fact, we have a gigantic budget surplus, like billions and billions of dollars. And so part of that money, our governor, Gavin Newsom, is proposing to give to supply chain and goods movement projects. So there's a proposal for $2.3 billion to go to goods movement projects. Not all of that is going to be administered by my agency. Some of it is going to be through the Air Resources Board and through the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. There's some funding for like workforce development and for zero emission freight equipment. But we have a really big chunk of that $2.3 billion. We have $1.2 billion that will be going toward port infrastructure and goods movement projects. And I should clarify that this budget hasn't been agreed to yet by the legislature, but all of the signals we're getting are that they're supportive of it. So we're pretty confident we're going to get this funding. So we're getting ready. We're starting to draft guidelines in the event that we will get this $1.2 billion. We're thinking of what kind of projects might be eligible. So we're thinking like port projects, grade separations, rail yard expansions, zero emission projects, and anything else where our existing funding programs kind of have a gap. We want to really be able to cut down on the supply chain congestion issues that we've been seeing in California, which starts at the ports, but is certainly related, to the railroads and the trucks and all of that system of systems that's working to get goods throughout our state and to the rest of the country. So some of the guidelines that we have for this program are that the projects need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They need to promote transportation equity, reduce freight-related deaths and injuries, and modernize the resilience and the competitiveness of California's freight system. So we have some guardrails, but we have a lot of flexibility to make this program what we want to make it. So we held 3 virtual listening sessions focused on different parts of the state, one focused on Southern California, one focused on Northern California, and one focused on the Central Valley, to really hear from folks, like what would they use this money for? What kind of projects do they have in the pipeline? What kind of restraints should we put on this project? What should we be looking for and evaluating when we're accepting applications? So we got a lot of good feedback and are still hearing from people on how we should draft those funding guidelines. So we're working on that. And I think that's kind of the biggest update. Oh, the one other thing I'll mention for the MARAD and USDOT people in the room is that we're really looking at utilizing this funding as match for IIJA funding. So we really also want to sort of pair it up to the programs that are related to goods movement. So we'll be competitive with those. So yeah, that's my update.
Thank you. Is there any other states that want to give an update that had not yet today, or that did today and have a further update?
Hi, Secretary Thompson. This is Mike Halstead from Wisconsin DOT. Just restored my connection here. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I would just like to give a short update on some things that are happening here in Wisconsin.
That'd be great.
You know, we mentioned our Harbor Assistance Program earlier. Craig, am I okay to go?
Yep.
Okay. And the Harbor Assistance Program, as you heard, is really making a difference for our commercial ports here in Wisconsin. Earlier this year, we announced $9.4 million in Harbor Assistance Program awards for our 2022 cycle. We had 6 applicants or 6 grantees, and I can just highlight a couple of examples of what the Harbor Assistance Program is doing. We have a new ag commodity transloading facility on the Mississippi River in La Crosse, and the harbor funds will be used to create a solid pier, and river barges will be filled with ag commodities, including dried distiller grains. Another good example in Port Milwaukee, we also have another ag transload facility that's being constructed there, also with some dried distiller grains, but we are expanding that, helping expand that facility to take other commodities, and the Harbor Assistance Program funds will be used for more infrastructure for that project. In Superior, we have another new harbor facility that'll just take a lot of various bulk goods, and our Harbor Assistance Program award for that project will help dredging and to build a new dock wall. Those are just a couple examples. There's a few more. But you know, the Harbor Assistance Program is like many of our funding opportunities, are really helping Wisconsin reach new markets, and we're seeing a lot of jobs created. It's really boosting the local economies, and it's been interesting to just watch the relationships grow as we partner with the ports and some of the harbor facilities, and watching those projects come to fruition, strengthening businesses. We're helping keep our car ferry system in line with grants we've provided in the past, and really maintaining those relationships with our car ferry operators. And just overall, the investments that we're making in our ports are just really having a positive outcome here in Wisconsin. I'm also working with our teams to help understand what all the federal opportunities that we're seeing with the bill and with all the other federal grants. We're kind of helping our local ports, commercial ports, understand what those opportunities are and aren't. So I'm receiving a lot of calls and having discussions with our commercial port operators and harbor facilities. One thing that we did last year, the members of the council members that were bordering the Mississippi, we got together with the Upper Mississippi Basin Association and helped design a buffer study to look at a market analysis of what types of industries might be able to utilize waterborne commerce. And this was submitted to the Mid-American Freight Coalition and was chosen for funding, and it'll be starting this summer. So that'll be like a geospatial or a geoeconomic analysis for that area. That would be it, unless there's any questions.
Thanks, Mike. Did anybody have any questions? Okay, thanks, Mike. Anybody else online from any other states that wanted to give an update?
Yeah, this is BJ Murray with the Illinois DOT. I'll give a quick update. I think since the last time we met, we did finish our first ever Illinois Marine Transportation System Plan and Economic Impact Analysis Study. And then moving on from that, we were afforded $150 million for a Port Facilities Capital Investment Grant Program, and we were able to award $148 million of that. Those projects are now getting started. Those are 12 projects at eight different public port districts. And the type of projects varied from, we've got one that's a harbor sediment reduction, truck staging and call center, a couple dock wall rehabilitations, some rail upgrades and expansions,
and one's land acquisition and remediation and utilities, and a few other thrown in there. So those projects have been now awarded, and now they're just working towards hiring consultants and getting intergovernmental agreements with the department. And hopefully, next time we talk, that some of those will actually be under construction, or at least nearly under construction. So, thank you. Oh, one last thing. We also have done we've been able to tap into our FHWA funds and our state planning and research funds to do some port master plans and port expansion feasibility studies. So we've actually done about 10 of those within the last 3 years. So we're making progress anyway. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else online that wants to give an update?
Yeah, this is Robbie Burt with Mississippi DOT. Just a little update on we have our multimodal program, which addresses all, not just ports and waterways, but also aeronautics, public rail, and public transit. But we met yesterday, as a matter of fact, and we'll be preparing to make awards for the FY 2023 projects. And we had about $10 million in requests, and we were able to fund looks like eight this year. We had a little bit of carryover money, so we're going to award about $4.3 million to those ports for those projects. One of the things we have had run into, our agreements with the ports have a 2-year time frame on them. And we did experience some delays in several of the projects due to supply chain issues, COVID. So we did have to issue some extensions for some of the previous year's projects, but we're working through that. And then the other thing that we came out of, I was speaking for the ports themselves, I guess. In our legislative session this year, the legislature put $10 million into a port infrastructure fund that will run through our Mississippi Department of our Economic Development Group, MDA. So that's kind of a new program, new thing, and we've got a new guy over there that kind of just got into his role. So I look forward to working with him. I don't know exactly if their process is going to mirror ours, but as of right now, it's one-time money, but we'll take $10 million in addition to our 4.3. So hopefully in the next year, we'll have about $14 million invested into the ports in Mississippi.
Excellent. Thank you. Other states?
Yeah, sure. My name is Trey Daniel. I'm with Georgia DOT. We have a couple of updates I'd like to share. I guess our main good news is that the ship of the Savannah Harbor Expansion Project dredging portion of the project was completed this year. So our channel is down to the 47 feet required by the agreement, and we still have a couple of mitigation projects left to complete on that, and we will be completed with a project that's been 20 years in the making. So that's a great bit of progress. We also, the final version of the Brunswick Harbor Modification study has gone to be reviewed by the Corps engineers. That will provide us a wider channel, and there's also some wider meeting areas and turning basins for the Colonel's Island car terminal down there. You know, the railroad ships are getting bigger, just like all the cargo ships are these days. And also, we are exploring some options for an electric ferry for our Sapelo Island transit program down there. So we're trying to be innovative and good to the environment. So we are exploring that option. And anybody that has any experience with that, we'd love to hear some input and get some feedback on that as well. And I'd also like to introduce Mr. Clement Solomon. He is our new division director and my boss, and he's joining us this afternoon. So he's learning about the waterways and all our important topics. So I'm glad for him to be here with us. But that's all I have, unless anybody has any questions.
Any questions? Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other states that have an update?
I believe Tennessee. Oops, sorry.
Go ahead.
Nope, I was just going to say from online, we had one more Tennessee. Dan.
Yeah, so I already gave an update at the freight call, but there was a couple people that weren't on there. The only thing really related to water, just listen to Chris talk about all the issues down in Louisiana. I guess our water's better here in Tennessee. If you want to get some of that funding here, my old friend. No, but the other one I want to talk about is we're really looking at all the ports in Tennessee with the Cumberland, the Tennessee River. Got a research study that we're going to undertake in August to really look at it from that perspective of what port eligible. So I was real interested in the one slide there that was put out today and a copy of this, so we can follow up to make sure we're crossing all the T's and dotting out the I's as we look out in the future for Tennessee. That's really about the only, well, one other thing. I've talked about this before. We have a rail competitive connectivity grant. It is basically to take roads off the highway. It is rail focused, paid by a rail, so it has to have a rail spur connected to it. But I just attended in the Nickajack Port down near Chattanooga, a groundbreaking. We're going to take 1,000 trucks off the road on a shipper that's like a rail connection to a port. We're going to be opening up a new round of that probably by the end of the year in Tennessee. So it's been very well received. 3 qualifications are basically just taking trucks off the road, jobs in rural areas, and potential expansion opportunities for current rail served customers. So I think that's about all when it comes to Committee on Water.
Wonderful, thank you. And then I think we have Oklahoma in the room here.
Yes,
okay.
You heard from us a little bit this morning, but a few more things specific to our waterways program. Oklahoma DOT is currently under modernization effort, and within that, we've created a multimodal division. And so our waterways program will now be moving under the freight mobility side of that alongside our rail and rail construction. Moving forward with that, we do have a couple of grants that we've applied for a moorings modernization project on our river system in response to the 2019 flooding. We found out we need some updated mooring structures that we can tie off our barges to in the event of another flood or high water events such as that. So we've applied for a raise grant. This will be our 3rd round on that. We've come close the last 2 times and we're going for a 3rd time. We've also going to be submitting a PIDP grant for the same project as well. As far as priorities on our river system, the top priority system of the MCARNs has always been the Three Rivers project, which with the IIJA is now funded to completion. So that project is now scheduled to be complete, which we're very excited about. And we too have a deepening project, 12-foot channel. There are certain areas on our river system that are not quite 12 feet. They're at 9 feet, and we want to make sure the whole system wide is 12 feet. So there was an IIJA addendum for $92.6 million in construction dollars to go towards that project. And ODOT, we're currently working with the Corps to kind of identify and obtain properties for dredge disposal. Other than that, we do have a critical maintenance backlog of $301 million is where we're sitting at this year. So that's up from 230 last year. So we're still chipping away at that as a top priority on our system as well. And that's it.
On the moorings grant and the PIDP grant, is that Oklahoma DOT is doing that, or
yes.
the port's doing that? Okay, great.
Yes. In collaboration with the ports, but ODOT, we are carrying it, and we've committed $5 million to the funding of the project.
That was my question.
So,
thanks.
Thought it might be.
Sorry.
Okay, is there any other states in the room that wanted to give an update? Oh, Michigan?
Yeah, so Michigan can provide a little update in addition to what we shared this morning. But in regard to the Sioux Locks project, which many of you are familiar with, but if you are not, this is a new lock project, a new lock being constructed in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, to replace 2 inactive World War II era locks that are just obsolete. So this new lock would be is being built in the same dimensions as the operational lock that is there now. So it could handle 1,000 footers. So good news that that project received recently. It's receiving $66 million out of the IIJA and $205 million out of the fiscal 23 president's budget. So that's really excellent and is moving along very smoothly. And the Corps is doing just an excellent job with that project. We do also have some port bills in the state legislature in Michigan right now. What they're looking to do is create a formal maritime office within the DOT, which I am currently the office. So that would be that would be a new thing. And it's looking to also create a grant program, looking very closely at Wisconsin's assistance program. So a great inspiration, but of course has no funding attached to those bills currently. So that is pretty tricky. I'm a little jealous of some states with some budget surpluses right now because we could use it for something like that. We were looking to explore the option of using that, which was 10, now 30% eligible funding from the National Highway Freight Program to create a grant program, which would fund freight intermodal, so rail, port, and other modes. So if these bills don't get approved, perhaps this is something we could provide regardless. So that's very draft form and we're currently looking into it. So those are just a few quick updates from Michigan.
Thank you. Other states there we go, Arkansas.
Yeah, we have a called the Arkansas Port Intermodal and Waterway Development Grant Program. And this year, we just opened that up April 1st. It closes May 15th, but we have like $1,863,153 to award. This is just a grant program that's funded by the ad valorem taxes that we collect from the barge lines in Arkansas. And it's open to our ports and intermodal authorities that are located in the state of Arkansas, not on the Arkansas River. And we have a separate fund for them called the Arkansas River Navigation System Fund. And the money that goes into that fund is used for projects that improve the system as a whole. So we've done some P3 projects with the Corps of Engineers, for example, for coming up with a model for Mile 222, which is an area that has a lot of sediment buildup, and they're looking for a self-scouring, system to put in that area. Of course, that's probably gonna have to change now that we've got the 12-foot channel thing coming. So we're not really sure what that's gonna look like. But another project that we've worked on with them is redesigning the tow haulage. All of the locks in the state of Arkansas, we have 13, and they all have different tow haulage designs. So we're trying to find a design that we can use at all of those locks so that, we can have like interchangeable parts and components and things like that when things break down. And so that's one of the projects that we're working on right now. That's all I got.
Thank you. Any other updates? Okay.
Yeah, John Stevens, Port Kansas City. And while we're a Missouri Port Authority, we're also the primary port for the state of Kansas. So representing the bi-state side of this, just a couple updates. Our formerly long-term mothball bulk goods terminal right on the state line that we reopened in 2015, we continue to see thanks to continued match investment and funding, we continue to improve that. We've added a second 7,000 ton fertilizer dome and bulk goods dome. And we actually are now experiencing month over month record tonnage coming in and out of there, primarily fertilizer and other agricultural products, primarily due to the reliability of the lower Missouri, thanks to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and their investments and continuing release, keeping the navigation depth consistent that's allowed that assurances for a lot of those folks. Additionally, we did complete a KC container market analysis and intermodal trade forecast that showed significant growth in the Kansas City region, both in TEUs and in overall need for intermodal goods, shipping and multimodal. So we are in late stages in a 420-acre Missouri River terminal project that will be approximately $500 million investment on the Missouri River to be a true intermodal facility with all 5 Class 1 rail, trucking, as well as container on barge facility. So we're in the late stages on that and moving that forward, and look forward to working with all the partners from Louisiana on up the network as we look at the all of the needs related to repositioning of TEUs, bulk grains, and other import and export needs to get things into the Midwest and out of the Midwest to the world.